The morning sun filtered through newly hung curtains as I unpacked the last of my belongings in my new home. After 5 years of relentless saving, countless overtime shifts at the hospital, and sacrificing every vacation, I had finally achieved what felt impossible for so long: homeownership in Willow Creek Estates. I stood in my living room, surrounded by half-opened boxes, and allowed myself a moment to absorb the reality. This 2,400-square-foot house with its pristine lawn and spacious backyard was mine, all mine. I walked through each room once more, mentally placing furniture and planning color schemes. The second bedroom would be perfect for my sister Jenny, and the third for my nephew Ethan. They needed this fresh start as much as I did. Jenny had finalized her divorce just 3 months prior, and the proceedings had left her financially and emotionally drained. Her ex-husband had become increasingly unstable during their marriage, and the court battles that followed were brutal. Ethan, only 8 years old, had witnessed too much for his tender age. Through the kitchen window, I admired the neighborhood stretching before me. The lawns looked almost artificially perfect, trimmed to identical heights, flowers planted in symmetrical patterns. Children rode bicycles on smooth sidewalks. An elderly couple walked hand in hand beneath the shade of mature oak trees. This was exactly the stable, peaceful environment Ethan needed after the turbulence of the past year. The doorbell rang just as I opened another box marked kitchen. Standing on my porch was a woman in her early 50s with expertly highlighted blonde hair and a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored khaki pants. She held a gift basket wrapped in cellophane. "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," she said with a practiced smile. "I am Diane Holloway, president of the Homeowners Association. We are so pleased to have new neighbors." I accepted the basket, nodding the expensive wines and gourmet chocolates inside. "Thank you so much. I am Rachel. My sister and nephew will be moving in next week." "How wonderful," Diane replied, though her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "We have a neighborhood barbecue this weekend. You simply must attend. It is the perfect way to meet everyone." Before leaving, she handed me a thick binder embossed with gold lettering. "Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association Covenant, Conditions and Restrictions." "Everything you need to know is in here," she said, her tone shifting from welcoming to instructional. "We take our community standards very seriously. It keeps our property values high and our neighborhood beautiful." The barbecue that weekend was picture perfect, like something from a real estate brochure. Diane made a point of introducing me to everyone, though I noticed her grip on my elbow was firm, almost steering me towards certain neighbors while avoiding others. Most unsettling was her massive Rottweiler Zeus, who roamed the community park unleashed despite prominent signs stating all pets must be leashed. When I mentioned this to Thomas, a friendly middle-aged man who lived 2 streets over, he lowered his voice. "Everyone calls her Karen behind her back. She enforces every rule on others but considers herself exempt. Nobody challenges her anymore." 3 days after the barbecue, I found the first note taped to my front door. "Dear homeowner, your mailbox appears to be desert sandstone rather than the approved Sahara beige, as specified in Section 423 of the HOA guidelines. Please remedy this violation within 14 days to avoid penalties." The note was signed with a flourishing Diane Holloway, HOA president, and included a smiley face that somehow made it feel more threatening. Standing in my driveway staring at my perfectly normal mailbox, I felt the first shadow fall across my suburban paradise. The notes continued with alarming frequency. 2 weeks after moving in, I received a violation notice about my garden flowers being non-conforming varieties. My sister Jenny had planted cheerful sunflowers along the side of the house, apparently an egregious breach of Section 517, which permitted only approved perennials in predetermined color schemes. The next week, I was cited because my garbage can remain visible from the street for approximately 45 minutes after collection, a violation of Section 382. Each notice bore the same signature and smiley face. Each one referenced specific sections of the HOA covenant with unsettling precision. I dutifully complied with each demand, repainting the mailbox, removing the offending sunflowers, and setting multiple alarms on garbage day. Yet with each correction came a new violation. "She is testing you," explained Sarah, my neighbor from across the street, when she caught me replacing the unapproved solar garden lights with regulation models. "Corinne does this to every newcomer. She needs to establish dominance." Most concerning was Zeus, the massive Rottweiler who continued to roam the neighborhood unleashed. I often spotted him prowling along our fence line, his dark eyes tracking movement inside our yard. Ethan, who had begun playing soccer in our fenced backyard, would freeze whenever the dog appeared. "That dog scares me," Ethan confessed one evening as I tucked him into bed. "He growls when I kick my ball." I reviewed the HOA covenant and found Section 734. All pets must be leashed when outside the owner's property. Aggressive breeds must be properly secured at all times. Armed with this information, I drafted a polite email to the HOA board expressing concern about the unleashed Rottweiler and requesting enforcement of the existing pet rules. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a stately building with colonial architecture and uncomfortable folding chairs. I arrived early and took a seat near the back. Diane sat at the center of a long table at the front, flanked by 4 board members who seemed to function more as an audience than participants. When the floor opened for community concerns, I raised my hand and was acknowledged with visible reluctance. "I would like to address concerns about unleashed dogs in the neighborhood," I stated calmly. "Specifically, there is a Rottweiler that regularly roams without restraint, which violates Section 734 of our covenant." The room fell silent. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, studying their shoes or suddenly becoming fascinated with the ceiling tiles. Diane smiled thinly. "Zeus is a champion show dog with extensive training," she responded with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He has never had an incident in the 9 years he has lived here. Perhaps new residents should focus on their own compliance before concerning themselves with established community members." The board members nodded in synchronized agreement, and the matter was summarily closed. After the meeting, Thomas approached me in the parking lot. "She has been president since the neighborhood was built," he explained quietly. "She personally selected each board member. Nobody runs against her anymore." In the weeks that followed, my sister and I documented every sighting of Zeus off-leash. We filed formal complaints following the exact procedures outlined in the HOA charter. Each complaint mysteriously disappeared from the record. When I followed up, the board secretary informed me that no such complaints were ever received. Meanwhile, Ethan continued playing in our backyard. We instructed him never to approach the fence when Zeus was visible, to come inside immediately if he spotted the dog, and to always tell an adult if he felt unsafe. We installed a new lock on the gate and checked the fence line daily for weak spots or gaps. Despite these precautions, the tension continued building like a thunderstorm on the horizon, distant, but approaching with inevitable force. I could not shake the feeling that something terrible waited just around the corner. April brought perfect spring weather to Willow Creek Estates. The Saturday morning dawned with cloudless blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming cherry trees. Ethan had been looking forward to this day all week. I had promised him the entire afternoon to practice soccer in the backyard. "Watch how fast I can dribble now," Ethan called out excitedly, his small feet skillfully maneuvering the black and white ball across our lawn. His Spider-Man t-shirt fluttered as he ran, and his face glowed with the pure joy that only children can experience. I sat on the back patio with a glass of lemonade, alternating between watching Ethan and scrolling through emails on my phone. Jenny was at a job interview, her first promising lead in months. The afternoon stretched before us, peaceful and ordinary. There was no premonition of what was about to happen, no warning sign that our lives would be irreversibly altered within minutes. My phone rang. The hospital was calling about a shift change. I glanced at Ethan, who was happily kicking his ball against the far fence, well away from where Zeus typically appeared. "I will be right back, Ethan," I called out. "Just need to take this call. Stay away from the fence, okay?" He nodded without looking up, completely absorbed in his game. I stepped inside, the glass door sliding shut behind me. The call was brief, no more than 90 seconds. I was confirming my availability for an extra shift when I heard it. A scream unlike anything I had ever heard before. A scream that contained pure terror. The phone dropped from my hand as I raced toward the door. Time seemed to warp and stretch. The distance from the kitchen to the patio door felt impossibly long. When I burst into the yard, the scene before me burned itself permanently into my memory. Zeus had somehow cleared the 6-foot fence. The massive Rottweiler had Ethan pinned to the ground, his powerful jaws clamped around my nephew's right arm. Blood soaked the green grass. Ethan's screams had weakened to whimpers as shock set in. His soccer ball lay forgotten near the fence. My body moved on pure instinct. I grabbed the garden hose, turning it to full pressure and aiming the spray directly at the dog's face. Zeus barely flinched. I screamed for help, my voice carrying across the neighborhood. When the water proved ineffective, I seized the metal watering can from the patio table and swung it with all my strength. The impact finally caused Zeus to release his grip. The dog backed away, snarling, blood dripping from his muzzle. I placed myself between the animal and Ethan, who lay motionless on the grass. His Spider-Man shirt was shredded, the vibrant red design now indistinguishable from the blood soaking through it. Neighbors appeared at the fence, their horrified faces peering over. Someone yelled that they had called 911. Another neighbor, a retired firefighter, climbed over to help me apply pressure to Ethan's wounds. The minutes that followed were a blur of panicked activity. I called Jenny, my voice breaking as I delivered the news no mother should ever receive. The ambulance arrived with wailing sirens that seemed to harmonize with my sister's sobs when she arrived moments later. The paramedics worked quickly, their faces grim as they assessed the damage to Ethan's small arm. Words like arterial damage and possible nerve severing floated through the air. As they loaded Ethan into the ambulance, Diane Holloway appeared at my gate. Zeus was now secured on a leash, appearing calm and docile at her side as if nothing had happened. She surveyed the blood-soaked grass with clinical detachment. "Your fence must have had a gap," she said coldly. "Zeus would never attack unprovoked. The boy must have teased him." My body trembled with rage and shock. There was no gap. He jumped the fence. He attacked a child who was playing in his own backyard. Diane's expression hardened. "You will find that difficult to prove. Dogs do not attack without reason. The incident occurred on your property, which places liability on you, not me." The animal control officer who arrived seemed to know Diane personally. They spoke in hushed tones, with frequent glances in my direction. The officer took minimal notes and did not photograph the scene. When I insisted that Zeus be taken into custody as a dangerous animal, he explained that protocol requires evidence of unprovoked attack, and that the dog would remain with its owner pending investigation. My sister rode in the ambulance with Ethan. I followed in my car, hands still covered in my nephew's blood, clothes soaked from the struggle. As I drove, Diane's cold response replayed in my mind, her immediate deflection of responsibility, her protection of the dog rather than concern for a critically injured child. In that moment, something fundamental shifted within me. The person who arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later was not the same woman who had watched her nephew playing soccer that morning. Something had broken, and something much darker had taken its place. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric intensive care unit cast a sickly glow over everything. Ethan lay unconscious, his small body dwarfed by the hospital bed and monitoring equipment. His right arm was heavily bandaged from shoulder to fingertips, with drainage tubes extending from beneath the gauze. 27 stitches closed the largest wound, but the internal damage was far more extensive. Dr. Richards, a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a grim expression, delivered the prognosis in hushed tones while Jenny clutched my hand so tightly I lost circulation in my fingers. The lacerations were deep, affecting multiple muscle groups, she explained. Of greater concern is the nerve damage. 2 major nerves were partially severed. We have repaired what we could, but Ethan may never regain full use of his right hand. Jenny collapsed into a chair, insurance papers scattered across her lap. The hospital administrator had already visited to discuss financial matters with inappropriate timing. Our insurance deductible was $5,000. The reconstructive surgery that might restore more function to Ethan's hand was classified as elective, according to the insurance provider, meaning we would bear most of the estimated $27,000 cost. For 3 days, I barely left the hospital. Ethan underwent a second surgery to repair damaged blood vessels. When he finally regained consciousness, his first words were a whispered plea, "Do not let the dog get me again." His nightmares began that night, violent dreams that left him screaming and thrashing against the hospital restraints designed to protect his injured arm. The psychiatric resident prescribed medication to help him sleep, adding yet another expense to the mounting medical bills. While Jenny remained at Ethan's bedside, I launched a systematic campaign for justice. My first stop was animal control, where I filed a detailed report complete with photographs of Ethan's injuries and our yard. The officer seemed sympathetic but non-committal. "We will investigate, but without witnesses to the actual attack, it becomes your word against the owners," he explained. "And Diane Holloway has no prior complaints on record regarding Zeus." Next, I spoke at the HOA meeting, displaying the hospital photographs on my phone for all to see. The other homeowners appeared genuinely disturbed, but when I requested that action be taken against Diane for violating pet regulations, the room fell silent. Diane herself was conspicuously absent, having sent the vice president to chair the meeting in her place. "We sympathize with your situation," the vice president stated mechanically, "but HOA bylaws require documented evidence of repeated violations before punitive measures can be implemented." I consulted with 3 different attorneys, spending money we did not have on consultation fees. Each one delivered variations of the same message, without witnesses willing to testify about previous aggressive behavior from Zeus. Our case was weak. Furthermore, since the attack occurred on our property, we might be found partially liable for not securing our yard adequately, despite the fact that Zeus had cleared a regulation height fence. "You are up against someone with considerable local influence," explained the third lawyer, a woman who specialized in personal injury. "Diane Holloway has connections throughout the county. Her brother-in-law works for animal control. Her college roommate sits on the city council. Even if we took this to court, the deck would be stacked against you." 2 weeks after the attack, I received a certified letter from Animal Control. Despite my report, no action would be taken against Zeus or his owner. The investigation concluded there was insufficient evidence that the dog was not provoked, and that the incident occurred on private property other than the dog owners, which implies some negligence on the part of the property owner. That same day, I was informed by the HOA board that my complaints had been reviewed and dismissed due to lack of corroborating evidence. The final insult came when I discovered another violation notice on my door, citing uncollected yard debris resulting from the attack. The crimson-stained grass had been listed as a landscaping violation. That night, after bringing Ethan home from the hospital, I sat in my darkened living room listening to his whimpers from another nightmare. Jenny had finally fallen asleep beside him, emotionally exhausted from weeks of hospital vigilance. Through the window, I could see Diane walking Zeus past our house, the dog calmly healing beside her, unleashed as always. She glanced toward our home with an expression of smug certainty. Something cold and calculated took root in my mind. The system had failed us completely, twisted by influence, corrupted by personal connections, rendered useless by technicalities and loopholes. If the system would not provide justice, I would have to create my own. Justice requires patience. This became my mantra as I transformed our guest bedroom into what my sister jokingly called the war room. On the wall opposite the window, I constructed a detailed timeline of every interaction with Diane Holloway. Below it hung a large neighborhood map with key locations marked: her house, the HOA office, the community areas she frequented. Most importantly, I created a spreadsheet documenting her daily schedule with military precision. Diane left for Pilates at 8:15 a.m. each Tuesday and Thursday, returning precisely at 9:40 a.m. She walked Zeus at 7:30 p.m. daily, following the same route through the neighborhood. On Wednesdays, she visited the salon for a standing 2:00 p.m. appointment. Sundays were reserved for brunch with the other HOA board members at the country club just outside our subdivision. "You are becoming obsessed," Jenny commented one evening, though there was understanding rather than judgment in her voice. She had just finished changing Ethan's bandages, a painful process that left them both in tears. "I am becoming methodical," I corrected. "There is a difference." My first strategic move was installing a security camera system, 4 cameras positioned to monitor our property that coincidentally captured portions of the street and the edge of Diane's front yard. All perfectly legal, all technically aimed at my own property. Within 2 weeks, patterns emerged. Most notable was the parade of clients visiting her home office. Men and women in business attire entered her house at regular intervals, typically staying for 60 to 90 minutes. A quick review of the HOA covenant confirmed my suspicion. Section 9(1)(2) explicitly prohibited home businesses involving client traffic. The very rule she weaponized against others, she violated daily. I submitted a public records request for animal control complaints in our zip code. Though no current complaints existed against Zeus, I discovered 3 prior reports from former neighbors who had mysteriously moved away. The complaints had been filed but subsequently withdrawn, all following the same pattern of initial outrage followed by quiet resolution and relocation. While gathering information, I began hosting weekend barbecues in our backyard. I was careful to remain within HOA guidelines, sending proper notifications and ending precisely at the designated quiet hours. The first gathering attracted only Thomas and his wife, plus Sarah from across the street. By the third weekend, nearly a dozen neighbors attended. Wine loosened tongues. Stories poured out about Diane's selective enforcement, personal vendettas, and manipulative control of the board. Thomas revealed his brother worked for the county permit office. Sarah mentioned her law firm specialized in HOA disputes. Another neighbor, Marcus, served on the architectural review committee and had access to all homeowner applications and violation notices. I never mentioned revenge, only community accountability and equitable enforcement. Each person contributed a piece to the puzzle without seeing the full picture. Like a chess master arranging pieces before the decisive combination, I cultivated resources while maintaining an appearance of normal neighborhood socialization. The most valuable information came from Patricia, an elderly woman who had lived across from Diane since the neighborhood was established. Over her third glass of Chardonnay, she revealed that Diane had forced out the previous HOA president through blackmail involving financial improprieties. "She has files on everyone," Patricia whispered. "She finds your weakness and waits for the perfect moment to exploit it, That is how she maintains control. Patricia also confirmed my suspicion about Diane's home business. She ran an unlicensed psychological counseling practice despite having lost her license 5 years earlier for ethical violations. Her clients were unaware, believing they were seeing a fully credentialed therapist. Armed with this information, I developed a multi-layered plan that would use Diane's own weapons against her. First, anonymous reporting of her illegal business to code enforcement and the state licensing board. Second, compilation of documented HOA violations that she had committed but never been cited for. Third, assembling evidence of selective enforcement and financial irregularities in HOA operations. Most importantly, I tracked down the former neighbors who had filed complaints about Zeus, using social media and public records. 2 had moved out of state, but 1 family had relocated just 20 minutes away. Their daughter still had a scar from her encounter with the Rottweiler 3 years earlier. As my plan took shape, I maintained a cordial facade with Diane. I waved when our paths crossed. I paid HOA dues promptly. I corrected every cited violation without complaint. To all outward appearances, I was the model resident who had accepted her place in the hierarchy. But behind closed doors, I arranged my pieces meticulously, waiting for the perfect moment to call checkmate. The day of reckoning arrived on a perfect May morning. The timing had to be flawless, a choreographed sequence of events designed to leave no avenue of escape. I had taken a rare day off from the hospital, explaining to my supervisor that I needed to handle important family matters. The statement was entirely truthful. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I submitted an anonymous tip to code enforcement about unpermitted business activities at Diane's address. I included dates, times, and photographs of clients entering and leaving her home. The complaint was timed perfectly to coincide with the scheduled quarterly HOA inspection of the neighborhood, a ritual Diane typically led with clipboard in hand. At 9:30 a.m., while Diane was occupied with code enforcement officers at her front door, a courier service delivered manila envelopes to each HOA board member's home. The packages contained meticulously documented evidence of her selective rule enforcement, photographs showing her own property violations, juxtaposed with violation notices she had issued to others for identical infractions. Also included were financial records revealing her systematic waiving of fees for allies while penalizing perceived enemies. Thomas's brother from county records had provided official documentation of the 3 previous dog attack complaints that had mysteriously disappeared. The former neighbors I had tracked down supplied notarized statements about previous incidents with Zeus, including medical records from their daughter's injury and photographs of the scarring. By noon, my phone began ringing. The HOA vice president, sounding shaken, requested an emergency meeting for that evening. The board's secretary asked if I would be willing to present my concerns formally. The treasurer wanted to meet privately before the official gathering. The dominoes were falling precisely as I had anticipated. The emergency HOA meeting drew the largest attendance in neighborhood history. Cars lined both sides of the street leading to the community clubhouse. As planned, I arrived early with Jenny and Ethan. My nephew's arm remained in a sling, the still healing wounds a visible testament to what was at stake. Corinne arrived 15 minutes late, her customary punctuality disrupted by the day's cascade of revelations. Her expression faltered visibly as she noticed the unusually full parking lot. Inside, she found her customary center seat occupied by the HOA vice president. She was directed to a regular chair in the front row, a subtle but significant demotion that did not escape notice. The vice president opened the meeting with uncharacteristic authority. We have called this emergency session to address serious allegations regarding HOA operations and enforcement practices. A projector displayed security footage showing Zeus unrestrained on multiple occasions, juxtaposed with warning letters Diane had sent to others for the same violation. Financial records revealed discrepancies in the application of fines and fees. Emails showed her directing board members to target certain homeowners while ignoring violations by others. The color drained from Diane's face as her carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time. She stood and attempted to seize control of the narrative. "This is a coordinated attack based on manipulated evidence," she declared. "I have served this community faithfully for 9 years." Her rebuttal was interrupted by the arrival of animal control officers with a court order authorizing the removal of Zeus based on the pattern of incidents now properly documented. The timing was no coincidence. I had scheduled my formal complaint with the department head, bypassing her brother-in-law completely. "This is absurd," Diane protested as the officers explained the seizure order. "Zeus has never shown aggression without provocation." Thomas's wife, usually quiet at meetings, stood up. "He lunged at our daughter last year. You told us it was our fault for walking too close to your property." Another neighbor added, "He cornered my son against the fence during the Easter egg hunt. You said my son should have known better than to run." The floodgates opened. One by one, neighbors shared their experiences, not just with Zeus, but with Diane's tyrannical enforcement of rules she herself ignored. The testimonies continued for over an hour, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. The state licensing board representative arrived next, having been contacted about Diane's unauthorized counseling practice. He explained that practicing without a valid license carried potential criminal penalties, and that they would be investigating all client interactions. Diane's composure crumbled completely. "You have no idea what you are doing," she hissed at me across the room. "I built this community. I protected our property values. Without me, everything will fall apart." "No," I replied calmly. "Without you, perhaps we can become an actual community instead of subjects in your personal kingdom." The board called for an emergency vote. The decision was unanimous. Diane was removed as president effective immediately, pending a full audit of HOA records and practices. Animal control led Zeus away for mandatory behavioral assessment. Code enforcement issued citations for the illegal home business. The power she had wielded so carelessly had been turned against her with surgical precision. As she stalked out of the meeting, shoulders hunched in defeat, I felt no jubilation, only the quiet satisfaction of scales finally balanced. But the reckoning was not yet complete. Diane stood alone in the center of the community room, her kingdom collapsed around her. The emergency meeting had stretched past midnight as decades of mismanagement came to light. The interim board, now led by the former vice president, voted unanimously to remove her as president and initiate proceedings to recover misappropriated funds. "This is a witch hunt," she stammered, but her words found no sympathetic ears. The community had awakened from its long intimidation, finding strength in collective action. In the days that followed, the consequences of her actions continued to unfold. Animal control determined Zeus was dangerous and required either relocation to a specialized facility or humane euthanasia. The decision ultimately fell to Diane. The state licensing board opened a formal investigation into her unauthorized counseling practice. The county tax assessor began reviewing years of unreported business income. Through my attorney, I presented the terms of our settlement: full payment of all medical expenses related to Ethan's injuries, a public apology to my nephew, and immediate compliance with all outstanding HOA violations at her property. The alternative was a civil lawsuit that would expose every detail of her negligence and the attack in public court records. To my surprise, she agreed to all terms without negotiation. The Diane Holloway who appeared at my door to sign the settlement papers was a diminished version of the woman who had once ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist. Her carefully maintained appearance had slipped, roots showing in her highlighted hair, wrinkles no longer concealed by expert makeup. "I never meant for the child to be hurt," she said quietly, her first acknowledgement of responsibility since the attack. "Yet you did everything possible to avoid accountability afterward," I responded evenly. "The settlement includes a public apology to Ethan, not to me, not to Jenny, to an 8-year-old boy who still has nightmares about your dog." The following Sunday, neighbors gathered in my backyard. Tables laden with potluck dishes created a community atmosphere that had been absent from Willow Creek for years. Ethan sat nervously in a chair on the patio, his arm still bandaged but healing well. The reconstructive surgery had been scheduled for the following month, now fully covered by Diane's insurance. She arrived precisely at the agreed time. Gone were the tailored outfits and perfect accessories. She wore simple jeans and a button-down shirt. Her carefully maintained composure had crumbled completely. As stipulated in our agreement, she literally knelt before my nephew to deliver her apology at his eye level. "Ethan, I am truly sorry for what happened to you," she began, her voice wavering. "My dog hurt you, and that was my responsibility. There is no excuse for what happened or for how I behaved afterward. I hope someday you can feel safe in your home and neighborhood again." Tears streamed down her face, not calculated displays of emotion for audience benefit, but genuine remorse as she finally confronted the consequences of her actions. Ethan, with the simple wisdom of children, nodded solemnly and offered her a small smile. "I forgive you," he said simply, "but you should be nicer to everybody, not just me." The neighborhood healing began that day. A fundraiser organized by Thomas and Sarah covered the remaining expenses related to Ethan's recovery. The newly elected HOA board established transparent processes and fair enforcement. Monthly meetings became collaborative rather than confrontational. As summer turned to fall, Ethan's physical scars faded. He played soccer again, though more cautiously. His right hand would never have full strength, but the reconstructive surgery had restored most functionality. More importantly, the psychological wounds began to heal as he regained confidence in his safety. Diane sold her house that winter and moved to another state. Zeus was rehabilitated at a specialized facility for aggressive dogs, eventually placed with an experienced handler in a rural setting without children nearby. Our community transformed from isolated households to actual neighbors who looked out for each other. Justice does not always come from the system. Sometimes justice must be crafted by hand, with patience and unwavering resolve. Some might call what I did revenge, but I prefer to think of it as the necessary restoration of balance. In breaking Diane's power, we found our community's strength. In making her confront her actions, we all found a path to healing.